From TSN, our buddy and insider is Darren Dreger. Are you okay? Go ahead, Red.
Well, this place is in Niagara Falls. I could meet you there if you walk you around the joint.
I'm fascinated by this. I was listening intently to this conversation because who's kidding who? All four of us could use a little fine tuning.
Okay, so here's the thing.
Every sense.
Meet Red at the Sundowner. Have a couple pops, get loose. He'll walk you through the facility. Way you go.
We'll experience all life has to offer.
Yeah. Are they like getting blood drained and then they're putting it in a centrifuge and
no, they're not.
And then
they won't. They want to do that. They aren't allowed to do any of that.
No.
Right beside the Gordie Howe Institute.
Yeah,
really.
I've heard of it. It's high end. It's high tech stuff.
It is.
Red likes to dabble in some of that stuff, like the red light. He's got the red light mask for the therapy. He's got a grounding mat.
Yeah.
He gets his. Do you still get you try and get your sunlight every morning?
I got grounding sheets that I sleep on, and then a PEMF mat that I take my afternoon naps on.
Yeah. So can I tell that it reminds me of a story, a Nick Kiprios story way back in the day. And this was early. So we're talking around 2000, somewhere around there. So Kipper had just retired. And we all know, I mean, he was dealing with some concussion related issues. So we're going to Buffalo. It could have been 99. It might've been Buffalo, Dallas in the Stanley Cup final. And so how do we get there? I mean, it's not that far from Toronto. We could have jumped in his, Land Rover or whatever, driven to Buffalo. Instead, he rents a stretch limo, right?
Oh, yeah.
And, so the stretch drops us off the back door in Buffalo to go to the morning skate. Kipper goes from the morning skate into the limo and then goes to this doctor appointment. There was a doctor, probably still there, who did like brain massage and things like this, right? To try and help him get through it. And about 3 days later, I get called into the boss's office. Who approved the stretch limo all day? Like, it wasn't a drop off and maybe a pickup. Yeah. It was, oh, no. Mr. Kiprios needs to go here, that he needs to go there. So yeah, it's all good times.
Yeah, good times. I remember Dennis Miller had the bit about these people that ride around in limousines and think they're so fancy. It's like, hey, look at me. I've got $80. Anyway, let's get into it. Busy night. It's what do you call it? Fits and starts. Flames haven't played all week. We're waiting for them. They got Vancouver tomorrow. No, Tampa Bay's hardly played any hockey. Now they're going to catch up. But last night, a lot of things going on. The Rangers beat the Boston Bruins. That's a heavyweight tilt. And we'll get into, I was going to ask you about coaches, but there's so many teams right now. And I think maybe I'm guilty of saying it every year at this time, but last year it felt like it was Boston. Mm-hmm. But there's got to be 5, 6 teams, 7, maybe more. Yep. Where if you said this is going to be your cup champion, I could see that. There's some maybe more in the East. I'm not even sure how you would handicap it.
Yeah, I'm not quite as sold, and I might weigh it more heavy in the West. I still look at the Colorado Avalanche, and I'm like, oh boy, even what they did around the trade deadline. I mean, Sean Walker was a top pairing, all situation player for the Philadelphia Flyers. Now he's a third pairing guy for the Colorado Avalanche. They moved a pretty good defenseman, Bo Byram, to the Buffalo Sabres, and added some other interesting pieces. And then you've got the impact of Rantanen and McKinnon and Makar. Some want to question the goaltending in Colorado. I mean, I think you could do that just about across the board. The East, guys, when I look at Boston, it's unfair to say that I think it's smoke and mirrors, because that'd be disrespectful to, Brad Marchand and obviously David Pasternak and some of the good players there. Look up the middle of the ice in Boston. Mm-hmm. Don Sweeney wasn't able to do anything to improve that. I mean, for a good chunk of the year, they had a 19-year-old and Matt Potter playing center ice for the Boston Bruins.
Well, we were so focused here with the Lindholm deal coming. It just felt like
Colorado was the two fits.
So, Rangers would spook me a little bit. I think that's a really, really good team, and the goaltending there is top notch, obviously. Toronto is dinged up here a little bit. It's more load management than anything. So yeah, I understand, Boomer, what you're saying. I mean, there are a number of teams across the NHL that absolutely should be considered top contending teams, but at least from my position, it still looks like the West is a little heavier.
I just look at the Central alone. You've got Winnipeg having an incredible year. They might win the President's Trophy. Colorado and Dallas look like wagons. Nashville's the hottest team in the league. They're 14-0-2 in their last 16 games. Yeah. And we haven't even talked about Vegas, Edmonton, Vancouver yet in the West. Like, that's crazy.
It really
is.
Yeah. If Vegas is going to get healthier. We don't know that Mark Stone is going to be healthy enough to return at any point. Certainly not for the start of the playoffs, but we'll see how things go there. If they get a little bit healthier, that's a team that knows what the momentum shift is all about when the postseason kicks in. Look at you're right with Winnipeg. The two ads there, primarily up front in Toffoli and Monahan, have really, really kind of bolstered that group to a point. I mean, Cole Perfetti, 10th overall. Can't find his way back into the lineup. And when you look at most of the first half of the year, when he was on the power play and he was playing in their top six, he was a point-producing kid. Now he's on the outside looking in and wondering how he gets back in. So I love this time of year for all of those reasons. There's not as much jockeying as maybe we'd like at this point of the regular season, but there's still some questions and some possibilities, particularly in the East with how things have, Detroit is winning again, but they were struggling without Dylan Larkin. Philadelphia Flyers go a little bit sideways with their coach, John Tortorella. Washington's hit or miss, but still, I mean, the Caps could overtake Philadelphia in the Metro. So lots of possibilities ahead.
Pinder brought up Nashville. They win again. They 14-0-2. And I was just kind of looking this morning, and there's some layers to it. I guess you want to be hot going into the playoffs, but we're still a month out. You wonder, are they maybe peaking too early? Can you sustain this? Obviously not 14-0-2, but can you still be at this sort of a clip when the playoffs come around? They have 34 regulation wins. That's more than Dallas. That's more than Edmonton. What a job that Andrew Burnett has done. And I don't know if there was a turning point. Everyone points to the No U2 concert in Vegas. But it's an amazing thing. Trotz comes in, Burnett comes in, and right now, at least, it looks like they've got something cooking.
Yeah, I was never a believer in the UC Saros trade speculation.
Yeah.
I think it was well placed by Barry Trotz, not to get Saros going, maybe to get everyone else going around him. And I feel like it worked. I mean, prior to the start of the year, they were talking contract extension with UC Saros and sort of tongue-in-cheek saying, hey, we envision you being a lifer here, and there being the statue of you outside Bridgestone at some point. Then all of a sudden he's in trade speculation. And, I heard one wild rumor that suggested that they were in conversation with the Los Angeles Kings, which would have been short. And Nashville wanted Byfield, wanted Clark, and wanted a top draft pick. And, obviously Rob Blake is going, okay, very good chat, and we'll talk to you in the summer. But goaltending is such a big part of what they do there. At the GM meetings this week, part of what you get from there, aside from some of the little tweaks that they talked about and they recommended, is some of the stuff that didn't happen or potentially could happen. And one of the more juicy rumors that I heard about, not from a manager, I should qualify that, is, again, when things linger, and now I look at Tampa Bay, and, we've followed as closely as we can what might become of the captain, Steven Stamkos, right? And the fact that they didn't talk to him in the offseason, decided that it's better to wait until this coming offseason when he's a free agent. And there's reason to believe that the Nashville Predators are going to do whatever they can to get in that game. And who's there formerly from Tampa Bay? You've got McDonough. There's some other pieces there who might be able to drag the veteran into Nashville. I guess the reason I'm telling that story kind of fuels the fire of what Barry Trotz and the Nashville Predators, if not what they're capable of now, which looks pretty good. And I'm a believer in Andrew Burnett's coaching, but I think that this is a team that realizes that you do have a window. So I think that they're going to do some stuff in the offseason that might surprise some people as well.
So get us up to speed on Stamkos. We went at length with Noodles on this topic on Wednesday, I believe. And Rhett wasn't exactly convinced that he was a crucial ingredient there moving forward. And I get it. He's longer in the tooth. I don't even know what a contract looks like, AAV or term. So how did we get here? Where's it going?
Yeah, it's a good question. And I mean, look, I kind of side with Rhett on this one. And that's just the reality, right? That's Father Time coming into play here. And it happens to every single player at this stage of his NHL career. And one thing we're reminded of every time we deal with a situation like this, and you can shift over to the Pittsburgh Penguins, look at Crosby and Malkin and Letang, and I guess throw Erik Karlsson into that mix. You're reminded that it is a business first. And the personal stuff does matter. Ownership in Tampa Bay knows what Steven Stamkos has helped build and has been a significant part of in bringing championship hockey to Tampa Bay, Florida. But you also have to recognize that, the door isn't necessarily closing as Stamkos gets older, but you have to allow management to make those tough decisions. So I think that Tampa Bay is going to try as hard as they can to keep Stamkos, just because of how impactful he's been and still is as a star figure in that community. But there's a price on everything. There's a price on everything, and it might get a little too rich.
Do you think it's wise they try to keep him? I guess it all comes down to that price. What are you paying?
Yeah, it does. Always. It does. And you know what? Again, not to compare players here, because John Tavares hasn't won a Stanley Cup, and he may not win with the Toronto Maple Leafs. And Stamkos has done that a couple of times with the Tampa Bay Lightning. Tavares is going into the final year of his contract. He's $11 million flat. The Toronto Maple Leafs aren't coming anywhere near that, right, going into next season when, as of July 1st, they're allowed to extend. So, does Tavares think that he's got enough in the tank, like Stamkos, that they want to chase a Stanley Cup? And they want to explore again the opportunity to do that through free agency, or in Tavares's case, I guess it could be via trade if they come to that realization or determination. It's just, it's where they're at. It's where these players are at in their career, and the tough decisions that Kyle Dubas has to make in Pittsburgh. Man, I saw him with a smile on his face in Florida once. He's got the weight of the world on his shoulders, knowing the mess that he's going to have to try and clean up with the Penguins. But that's where you get to when you've got to make those tough calls on significant, borderline iconic players. Crosby certainly is iconic, but Stamkos and Tavares, I guess they nibble at that conversation as well.
Yeah. It was fun. We are bouncing around, but you bring up Andrew Brunette. Of course, he's in his first year there. Is a first-time head coach, and you forget that because there were a lot of people that felt like back in Florida, it was 21-22, Joel Quenneville, all that hits with Chicago and everything. He is out, and Brunette takes over. You could say maybe it's a great spot. Maybe that's a tough spot for a guy to take over. Gets them to the playoffs. They lose in round 2. He leaves Florida. They move on. Paul Maurice takes over. He goes to New Jersey as an associate there. The Devils get to the playoffs. They lose round 2, and then he comes to Nashville now. So it's 3 teams in 3 years for a guy who seems to be really highly regarded. I know your buddy Ray Ferraro. I've talked to him. He played with Brunette, loves him, and said it's just a matter of time. I'm happy for Brunette because I think he is one of hockey's good guys, and he does have some ties to Nashville, having the first captain, right? Just sometimes it feels like it's right in front of your nose. Like, here's a really good coach, guys. If you just want to hire this guy, he's right there. And it took a while.
A lesson in professionalism and humility, right? Because I don't want to go as far as to say he got mistreated in Florida, but he did so many good things in a real difficult situation. And Billy Zito, thinks, okay, well, we need more experience. Paul Maurice is available. I'm going to take a run at Maurice and see if he's a better fit. How do you argue that things haven't gone the way of Paul Maurice, Bill Zito, and the Florida Panthers? And then Bruno ends up in New Jersey, and I'm not really sure what happened there. And this isn't a knock on Lindy Ruff. I'm not kicking dirt on the guy while he's down here, because he could probably build a case right now that maybe he got treated unfairly, being dispatched recently in the fashion that he was by Tom Fitzgerald and the Devils. But there was reason to believe that before Lindy got the extension, that Brunette was going to be the next head coach of the New Jersey Devils. Conversation about that. So what happened? Don't know. Was there a change of heart? Did ownership get involved? But, Brunette, he didn't let his lip drop. He didn't hang his head. He said, all right, well, I'll just, wait for my next opportunity. He's a good coach, and he's being recognized now for being a good coach and a guy who's going to coach in the National Hockey League for a very long time.
And the thing for him is, I'm sure there was some money there, but it's not like he was, not to throw, like Craig Berube or a coach who has had a big contract and then was fired and is still making that NHL money. He wasn't making that big NHL coaching salary sitting on the sidelines. So to your point, he took the high road, didn't shit talk anybody, just kept going. And now it really seems like he's in a great spot there.
So here's an interesting sidebar to this, because I'm thinking of what Steve Staios and the Ottawa Senators might do, and any team that makes a coaching change in the offseason, because you've got some interesting names out there. And we, not just the guys who have been fired in season. Craig Berube is one of those, of course, and he's going to be coaching next season. I didn't know this, but I was reminded by a general manager on Wednesday. You know how many currently assistant coaches in the National Hockey League have former NHL head coaching experience? I was blown away by the number. I just took a random guess. I said 16. 25. There are 25 assistant coaches in the NHL with NHL head coaching experience, varying degrees. But so now, when I throw that number out there, you guys are thinking about it. You can probably come up with 20 names pretty quickly. But if you're a general manager, a team in the market for a coach, it's not just about looking at the American League or looking what you've got in your own interim guy. You're looking around the National Hockey League. And especially if you're a team like Ottawa, as an example, who feels like, okay, the manager's got to get his hands dirty and do some work. He's got to bring in some pieces here. But if it's not Jacques Martin, and it probably isn't, right? Like, Jacques has been there and done that. And he's helped them through a tough situation. Why wouldn't you look at a guy who's got legit NHL head coaching credentials, but he's just not a current NHL head coach, but is still actively involved and on a bench? So it's a curious market. The coaching fraternity right now is pretty deep.
Yeah, that is great. And I'm going through my head because, I saw Kirk Muller on the bench there the other day, and DJ Smith, he landed right there. And then there's Guy Boucher. He coached a lifetime ago, and there's Dan Bilesman. There's a ton of guys out there for sure. Yeah.
Gully. There's lots of guys for sure.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Dean.
No, go ahead.
Just what are you watching here in terms of most teams will be 12 to 15 games left? Like is there a team where, man, if they're out, it's trouble, or like, damn, if they got in, that would change things? Because it sort of seems like things are crystallizing a bit here. I don't know that anyone's going to reel in Nashville or Vegas in the West. East's a little more open. Is that fair?
I think that's fair. I wonder about the Washington Capitals. Now that's a team that, felt like maybe they should sell, and they did a little bit. But the Ovechkin factor matters there, and they've got some other experienced pieces that always kind of keep them in the conversation, and they're still in that conversation. Does finding a way to squeak in and make the playoffs, change the mindset of Brian McClellan and the Washington Capitals? Or do they just know, given the obvious, that they're going to have to renovate in some capacity in the offseason? And then you look at some of the bigger tasks. And, I'm going to repeat myself a little bit here. I can't wait for the end of the year media scrum around Sidney Crosby.
Yeah.
Can't wait. Because I want to know a couple of things. Number one, I want to know if he's going to declare that he's coming back to Pittsburgh and he doesn't want to have to deal with this in the offseason. If Sid doesn't completely slam that door shut and says, you know what, I need it. And my guess is, here's what he's going to say. I need a few weeks to just back away, decompress, and speak with my friends and my family and make a call at this point. Right now, I'm exhausted. I'm too emotionally invested to make that decision. If he does that, boys, we're going to have a hell of a July 1st. It's going to be awesome. Free agent frenzy is going to be buzzing. Crosby has another year left, but Imagine if a player of that magnitude were to consider, chasing the cup and feeling jilted. And I think he does. Yeah, he's definitely sour at the direction of the Penguins. And I'm sure Letang is, and Evgeny Malkin, but who's kidding? Who the head of the snake there is Sidney Crosby. So for a lot of reasons that are going to be tough on Kyle Dubas, Pittsburgh is the team that everybody in the hockey community is paying attention to.
Come to Calgary for a moment, and I'm not sure if there's anything, but Dan Vladar, the Flames announced this week he's going to have hip surgery, which he's been dealing with for a little while. So that's well and good. I wonder how much that maybe muddies things for Craig Conroy. If you were contemplating a Markstrom trade, not to say Vladar is going to set that off the rails, but I think maybe you wanted to have Wolf and maybe Markstrom. You can't move Vladar while he's injured. It doesn't make things any easier. I don't know if it makes it tougher, but it's not an easier job for Craig to kind of get this goaltending, the three-headed monster figured out. No,
it's difficult. No doubt about that. I actually liked what I heard from Markstrom this week, where he talked about being in it right now and, focused on the guys in the room. Like, he said all the right things. He recognized that he still has a couple of years left on his contract. But he kind of stopped short of saying, let's get to the offseason and then we can make decisions at that point, even though really, let's read between the lines. That's what it's going to be all about. But he's a pro, right? So, maybe there is a change of heart and maybe there is a positional shift for Markstrom. And if that's the case, then, does that take some heat off Craig Conroy? And I would say maybe a little bit. As for Vladar, this would have been orchestrated by the player, the agent, and of course the Calgary Flames. Mm-hmm. It's a procedure that needed to be done sooner rather than later. Maybe he could have played through it, but why not get it done now and make sure he's as ready as he can be for training camp and the start of the season. So, goaltending is arguably the biggest story for the Calgary Flames in the offseason for a myriad of reasons, but maybe the temperature is dropping a little bit around Markstrom. That can change pretty quickly with a phone call at the end of the year, though.
And I think I forget who we were talking to maybe we were talking to Frank yesterday, but I wonder if that isn't the case because New Jersey makes a Jake Allen trade. So they're not desperate. They've addressed it to a certain extent, whatever you think of Jake Allen. And Boston, we know they've got a couple goalies, Linus Ullmark, maybe we know what happened with him at the trade deadline. Right. It's not like it's just cactus and tumbleweeds in the goalie department, right? There's some teams that needed help, maybe got some help, and there's some other bodies. It's not quite as dire a situation as maybe it was.
No, so we saw Don Sweeney, the general manager for the Boston Bruins, and Rob Blake in a corner speaking after one of the meetings in Florida. And automatically the thought bubbles come to mind here. Did you leak that? Did you leak that? Like those kind of conversations, which amuses guys like me. But I think the position that, Fitzy and the New Jersey Devils took before the deadline and certainly will have going into the offseason is, all right, the offer that we made on Jacob Markstrom leading up to the trade deadline is not going to be better. It's going to be far worse than what it was. Yeah. And the reason behind that is, what if Markstrom takes a stronger position and says, no, I want to trade. And here's the team that I want to go to. And if I don't go to this team, then I'm not going anywhere. You can ask me 50 times.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not doing that. Now, I'm not saying that's the case, but I think we could envision that happening based on everything that we've seen swirl around the star goalie and the Calgary Flames. But to your point, Dean, there's also a bigger market potentially in play here. So if you're Fitzgerald, it's not just about Markstrom. What about Linus Ullmark? What if Barry Trotz is willing to legitimately consider UC Saros in the offseason and go down the list from there? So I think, again, as we speculated leading up to the deadline on the market shrinking for Markstrom and for the Calgary Flames, that's the reason why. So maybe the offer won't nearly be as good as what it was going up to that deadline day.
I'm fascinated by the Kings. There's a team that has three goalies that I don't think anyone thinks there's a star there. Talbot's 36 and has had a nice run. Riddick was a third stringer playing in the AHL most of the year. He's on a bit of a heater. Copley, he's over 30 as well. All those guys are up, and you've got this emergence of Byfield. Now you see Brant Clark poking his head up into the NHL. They have some nice young pieces, but also Kopitar and Doughty. There's a window here.
There is.
Especially if things don't go well in late April or early May with goaltending, like that's a team to watch for me. And maybe that's why they were tied to Ullmark around the deadline.
100%. And look, I asked Rob Blake about the goaltending situation again, going up to March 8th, the deadline day, and he just wasn't able to get involved. Yeah, he had conversations. Of course he did. And probably had conversations on other players, but no different than the potential of a three-way trade, which would have ended with Lindholm in Boston, leaving the Vancouver Canucks as an example. It's so difficult to make the finances work that time of year. And Blake just couldn't get any traction going. There were a few Pierre-Luc Dubois rumors. Is that something that he reconsiders in the offseason? But I think shoring up, solidifying goaltending is going to be near top of list for the Los Angeles Kings. And look, I'm really appreciative of Rob Blake and that management group. I don't think that they'd be surprised if ownership, again, let's see how things play out here, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, they make it in. How do you know what happens? Maybe they're the shocking team, that dark horse team in the West that takes everybody by surprise. I don't think so, but maybe, then maybe situations are extended. But Blake had to make a tough call on Todd McClellan. Maybe senior management or ownership of the Los Angeles Kings makes a similar call with Blake and management in LA at the end of the year.
Is ownership usually understanding of the level of competition? Like, you look at the Kings as a really good team, and like you said, they could go on a run, they could win. But in all likelihood, they're not. But that's based on how damn good the rest of that Western Conference is.
They've got McDavid 2 years in a row, right? Maybe 3.
And you take them to 7 games or 6 or whatever. Like, you're right there.
Yeah.
Is it just one of those bittersweet things where it's like, well, we're going to change it anyway?
I think it depends, Rhett, on which owner we're talking about here. I mean, the majority of owners are fairly heavily involved, or at least want to be kept in check and in tune with what hockey operations is doing almost on a daily basis. But if I'm LA and I'm ownership there, I guess what would rankle me is how bad the trade turned out between Winnipeg and the Los Angeles Kings with Dubois in LA and the 3 pieces that the Winnipeg Jets got. How does that happen? Because, Winnipeg isn't as good without Iafallo and Kupari and Velarde. I mean, they're just not. And they've had some injury issues there to contend with. But I think those are some of the things where ownership goes, wait a minute now. We're older in certain positions, but, we also felt like we needed to give Byfield a little bit more insurance or insulation, if you will, not throw him to center ice immediately. So you convinced me to bring in and then sign Pierre-Luc Dubois to this mammoth deal because he's going to be our savior at center ice and, take some of the heat off Kopitar, and it just didn't work out. So, I think ownership is aware and is somewhat okay when teams are climbing up and you're kind of sitting there stagnant, but it all depends on the situation, what you've done to put yourself there.
Yeah, and you're a good series from Dubois away from that being a non-issue, right? It's just that simple, as maybe outlandish as that sounds at times this year.
Yeah, and he's capable, man. I mean,
that's the problem with that guy.
Yeah, I mean, that Columbus-Toronto series, he was a one-man wrecking crew for the Columbus Blue Jackets a few years back. That's the player that the LA Kings invested in. That's the player. Could he do it again? 100% he could. Just seemingly can't do it every night or every other night or 5-10 game stretches.
Yeah, we've seen some Hall of Famers do this too. This is not a death sentence.
No, you're right.
Yager looked
right.
like shit for a while and got to Broadway and he was back, and you're like, what
You're
the
not
fuck
wrong.
was that? Where have you been the last few years?
Ovechkin was never going to win. He couldn't do it. Datsuk and Zetterberg were never going to be able to do it for Detroit.
Yeah.
Well, if you need to grounding mats or a cold plunge or that sort of thing, you and Retro, we'll hook you up. We'll trade
your
numbers
lights
after this. Yeah.
Yeah.
So red light therapy or whatever it is.
Okay.
You'll take care of me, Red.
Some of that.
Yeah.
It's going to be good.
Meet Niagara. Go check out that facility.
Man, we'll be going forever.
Check it out, man.
Yeah, it'll be awesome. Have a great weekend, pal. Good to talk to
you too, guys. Thank you.
See ya. Hey guys, thanks for watching. Be sure to check out more of our content right here on the Flames Nation YouTube page. We had a bunch of great long form interviews. You can check out some videos we've done as well outside of the studio. And of course, if you want more writing or merchandise stuff, flamesnation.ca or nationgear.ca. Appreciate you watching.